I was looking forward to meet all of you. I'm sorry that I will be presenting in a recording. Facilities and building in consideration of disaster at hospitals. Kana Egawa will now present. Structure of the presentation. In the first part of this presentation, we will review the changes made a date to a 1996 guideline for the designation of disaster-based hospitals. And we will discuss two cases studies of hospitals involved in major disasters that were part of impedance of the guideline changes. Next, in order to examine the design method of hospital, buildings, and facilities, would make them available to future disasters. We will examine the results of a survey in which 50 disaster-based hospitals participated. There are relatively new hospitals built in or after 2050. Then, based on the Regional Disaster Manager Plan of the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, I will present the contents of the plan that are related to the reception of casualties, including those related to disaster-based hospitals. Finally, based on the point of described, we will describe measures for future disaster-based hospitals, including the necessary facility and equipment. Japan has been subjected to frequent large-scale seismic disasters, resulting in the significant human and material losses. Such extensive damage is predicted to continue into the future. Comparatively, the history of the development of business continuity plan and of measures to receive casualties in hospitals after a disaster is relatively short, at only about 30 years. In 1995, the Hyogo-ken earthquake triggered a nationwide development of major hospitals can take to improve and streamline the reception of casualties during disaster in Japan. The earthquake had a magnitude of 7.2 on the Richter scale and resulted in more than 6,400 dead. As a result, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare requested that each prefecture designated a disaster-based hospital. The requirements for the designation of disaster-based hospital and the guideline for their operations, including essential procedures such as the maintenance of electrical equipment, have been gradually modified in response to subsequent disasters and to the result of studies and research. In 2011, 5 years after the guideline for the designation of disaster-based hospitals were established, the Great East Japan earthquake, which has had a magnitude of 9.0 and triggered a large tsunami, struck Japan's east coast. Approximately 60,000 people died. The Ishinomaki Red Cross Hospital, a designated disaster-based hospital in the affected area, moved to its current location 5 kilometers from the coast and built a new hospital about 5 years before the disaster. As a result of the new hospital's distance from the coast, damage from the tsunami was avoided. The new building was designated and constructed to serve as disaster-based hospital in an area where a major earthquake disaster had been predicted. Thus, the effectiveness of the seismic soundness measures were demonstrated during the 2011 earthquake. And importantly, no patient or staff members were injured. However, all lifeline, electricity, gas, and water were cut off. Electricity was available for 3 days because a private power generating equipment was in place and 2,000 liters of fuel had been secured, which sufficient to run the generator for 3 days. For water, the hospital had 2 water tanks, one for drinking water and one for other purposes. The hospital had stored 190 tons of drinking water, which was sufficient for at least half a day, and 470 tons of non-potable water, which was sufficient for about 3 days and which was available for non-potable uses without the need to waste valuable drinking water. The Red Cross Hospital building had a main entrance with a sizable overhanging eaves to allow for triage area and a large outpatient waiting area with oxygen outlet to accommodate large number of patients. In the immediate aftermath of disaster, triage was carried out under the eaves in front of the entrance hall as per the guideline. Patients with minor injuries were treated in the entrance hall. Those of moderate injuries were treated in the outpatient waiting area, and seriously injured were treated in the emergency room. The heliport, normally used as a staff car park, was not affected by the disaster and was used to transport main patients and supplies, demonstrating its usefulness. On the other hand, one problem that remained throughout the affected area was that some hospitals were unable to provide adequate aid due to lack of information about the current situation, to not being able to access all of their supplies, or to not being able to maintain lifelines and human support. 5 years later, Great East Japan earthquake, a sub-earthquake, occurred in Kumamoto. I will talk about the situation at a disaster-based hospital during this earthquake. This disaster began with magnitude 6.5 earthquake, followed 28 hours later by a magnitude 7.3 earthquake. It was a disaster of a kind rarely seen before, with aftershock with similarly high magnitude following about a day later. There are around 200 dead. After the first earthquake, there was no power failure from the electricity company. However, although a hospital has 2 independent lines of electricity, both lost power during a main earthquake. but the majority of the building was able to cope by running its own private power generating equipment. However, the emergency center and SRC structure built in 2030 lost power for about 6 hours. The cause was damaged high-voltage AC load breaker in the electrical room. As the emergency center could not be used due to a power outage, the triage was moved to the area around in hospital minimalls. The area for seriously and moderate injuries were moved to corridor in front of X-ray room, and minor injuries were moved to entrance hall. The corridor in front of the X-ray room, which was not designed for this use, was of limited size, so the medical examination activities were in very close quarters. These difficulties made clear that, for safety reasons, it is important to continue to improve the seismic resistance not only buildings but also electrical and pumping systems. To further understand the needs of disaster-based hospital from the disaster preparedness perspective, we studied the facility and building design of recent built disaster-based hospital in Japan. The average number of beds in the 50 facilities was about 400. First, 70% of facilities had more than 2 lines of power in order to avoid a problem if the first line is broken. Secondly, all hospitals had private power generating equipment, as this part of installation requirements for the disaster-based hospitals. Of course, 60% have more than one, and the average number of generators was 2.3. Fuel was also stockpiled at all facilities, with an average stockpile of 3.8 days worth. Fuel stockpiles are assumed to be sufficient for more than 3 days, similar to water stockpile specified in the designation guidelines. Taking into account the potential for flood damage and other factors, 80% of facilities had electrical room-related equipment on the second floor or higher. Such equipment tend to installed on the relatively high floors, an average of floor 4.4. Only 20% had solar panels, which are recognized as a method of supplement electricity in times of disaster. High initial cost, seasonal and weather-dependent electrical production, and need for regular maintenance are possible reasons for the low number of such systems. And about 30% of facilities used all water for drinking water, taking into account potential lifeline failures. While this slightly higher figure may be because some sites had access to well water in the first place, it may also have remained relatively low because, as with solar panels, the initial cost and ongoing maintenance cost are somewhat high. The number of facilities with large water tanks known for their usefulness in the previous disasters was similar to those for facilities with well water at 37%. The installation of sewage tank also remained at 40%, with concern about initial cost and maintenance costs seen as a barrier. Tokyo plan for receiving casualties. Here, I will describe the contents of Regional Disaster Management Plan of Tokyo Metropolitan Government in the densely populated capital city, as well as typical medical facilities and their maintenance. In the event of earthquake, directly below the southern part of the city center, which is the most likely scenario in Tokyo, it is predicted about 6,000 people will die. The plan for disaster medical care in Tokyo in the disaster-based hospitals, as I described earlier, will receive and treat mainly serious injuries, while moderate will be treated at the disaster-based and disaster-based cooperative hospitals, and patients with minor injuries will be treated at the disaster medical support hospitals. The Tokyo guideline also recommended the emergency medical aid stations be set up to avoid large number of casualties crowding hospitals, while those with serious or moderate injuries can be taken to hospitals that can cope with their needs. In recent years, emergency medical stations have been set up on the premises of or close proximity to disaster-based hospitals. Casualties who cannot treated at the disaster-based hospital can be transported to medical facilities outside the disaster area. This is a staging care unit of AARQHOS. There is a potential site for an air medical transport based on the waterfront. A park has been developed that can be converted into a takeoff and landing area for 7 helicopters used for medical evacuation and other disaster medical support. In normal times, the park is used for disaster drill and disaster management events. The central wide area disaster center is in the park is designed to discuss and transmit disaster orders, and the ground floor is open to the public during normal times as a disaster education facility. AARQHOS Hospital, a disaster-based hospital, is also located on the site. Although the facility of oncology under normal circumstances, it will be also serve as a staging care unit, wide area transport hub in the event of disaster. Conclusion 1. The guideline received over the year to reflect the damage and response of the medical facilities during past disasters. 2. Measures to cope with power outage and water supply are priority for disaster-based hospitals, but relatively few facilities have solar panels or well water. 3. In recent years, emergency medical aid stations have been set up the premises or in close proximity to disaster-based hospitals. Therefore, it was considered necessary to identify measures to ensure power supply and equipment, mainly in outdoor areas. This is a summary of this presentation. Thank you for listening to the end.